is now running as well. And we'll start in 10 seconds. Good morning, everyone. It's 8 o'clock. Welcome again to another 1 hour at 8 o'clock. Today we do have a news release, an economic release, so we may get some volatility. Quickly, let's get on to the disclaimers. All Bookmap Limited materials, information and presentations are for educational purposes only and should not be considered specific investment advice nor recommendations. Trading futures, equities and digital currencies involves substantial risk of loss and is not suitable for all investors. Past performance is not necessarily indicative of future results. Okay, in fact, let's just go and have a quick look at the screens. Now we are going to quickly do the not the recap, but the preparation context, because we've got the 8:30, and I wanted to um, do some detailed analysis of some ETH profiles versus RTH profiles, i.e. how ETH often looks at the value that was established during the RTH profile or the latter half of the RTH profile. So that's what I'm going to try and do for our idea and education for this session. But let us go to the slides. Okay, so the same format. We're going to do the prep context first. Then we'll try and sort of blend 1 and 2, the education and the ETH setups. But I think we're going to run out of time because the PCE release is at 8:30, and we may as well watch that live at 8:30. Okay. So, yep, the major news release, I think I mistyped it when I first put it into the channel. It's not the GDP, which is Canadian, it's the core PCE. We also have the Chicago PMI at 9:45 and consumer sentiment at 10. So you have a big session of economic releases, plenty of volatility. And one thing they do tend to do, or would do like doing, on those kind of sessions is pump the market up or down, i.e. trend in a certain direction leading up to that release, and that's one of the things that they've been doing today, and we can look at how the heat map genuinely would have helped on that one. Okay, just to recap where we are. So the multi-month trend line for ES on the daily, we have touched it. Maybe we've had a false breakdown below it, but it is also holding as we speak. So it's intact. It may need a tiny bit of adjustment, but every trend line sooner or later will need adjustment. But at the moment, it is holding. And remember, when we have any lines, levels, etc., we're talking about ranges, not individual price levels. We're not talking to the tick, because in my opinion, that does not exist. Welcome on YouTube. Um, Marius, hello. Yeah, Discord's had all sorts of issues. Uvashi has had the same issues I've had. So I got one of those Cloudflare blocks earlier saying that I was completely blocked by Discord, but thankfully it's come back up. So I think the stream should be working for some people in Discord. I'm hoping CMJ and Dan can at least hear me and see what's on the screen. But yeah, it's Discord. I've also got a heavy cold. It's the beauty about having children. They do bring lovely colds and flus from school, so my voice is somewhat affected today. Right, let's keep going. So that's the multi-month uptrend line staying intact for the time being. NQ, yeah, we broke it a little bit more, but it's trying to get back above it. So it's just watch this space. Yeah. In other words, we have not categorically broken that multi-month uptrend just yet. The 15-minute, just to show where we are in relation to yesterday's range, we're in the top half of the range, and at the moment we're about yesterday's high, but we have gone above it. I took this snapshot about an hour ago, so it's out of date on the 15-minute. And the same with the NQ, we are back just under yesterday's high, but basically around there, and we've spent most of the ETH session above it. Sorry, above yesterday's mid. Okay, the pre-market. This is one thing in the TradingView stock heat map that you can set it to pre-market change, so you can see what has been pumping up with the market today. Pumping up in the sense that it's been going up above yesterday's high, and you can see the usual suspects are all there: Apple, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, since they have been the primary driver of most of the uptrend, the multi-month uptrend. The fact they're up is not a real surprise. In fact, there's nothing there that would surprise you in relation to where the market has been today. Okay, let us get rid of that and go back to the screens. Just reading another comment. Daniel, streaming okay to both Discord and YouTube. Good. I'm glad that Discord is good for where you are. Okay, I have, yeah, the first thing before we go into some of the profile education or information, as I call it, or maybe infotainment, depending on how you want to look at it. I wanted to zoom out vertically on this ES chart, and yeah, I've got the whole of the Asian session in, so really everything from 1800 New York time onwards. And the reason why I've got that should be fairly apparent. So we've got resting liquidity at the 4375 level and at the 44003 level, I suppose I'd call it. Let's just have a look. In fact, I have to go back down again. Yeah, about 4403. Importantly, not that round number of 4400, so I'll pay it a little bit more attention. So all I'm trying to say is that if you zoom out both horizontally and vertically on this, they did give you a really good clue in terms of liquidity magnets of where the market might go. And there was a really, really good run up into yesterday's high and beyond. So that was just a clue. And in direct comparison to that, NQ really hasn't been that useful. So if we zoom all the way out, I mean, you do have a level that it breached this one over here, very close to the 14950, 14950 round number, but in comparison to the clarity that you'd have got off the ES, that is nothing, absolutely nothing in my opinion. It's just a mess. And it is a mess because, as I keep saying, in the December futures contract, we've got this algo boundary above and below price, and it just makes a complete distortion of the colors on the heat map. Okay. Yeah, switching back to this one for a second. Yeah, at people's request, I have put on the stop and iceberg indicators. I haven't got the filtered icons showing. That means the individual icebergs and stops that are below the threshold will not appear. So I'm trying to keep it as clean as possible for these webinars. And I have popped on Market Pulse. One thing I don't want to get too distracted because we have such little time today before that news release. One thing I did mention in the last webinar on Market Pulse was that Nomi is running a new beta of 3 new algos of Market Pulse. So, for example, if I clicked on ES here, Market Pulse, and you look through there, there is a new one, or new to me, support and resistance. I have not had an opportunity to read through the information describing exactly what it is. So if I click on this now, I cannot really describe to you what you're going to see. So I have looked at it, just waiting for it to come up. There we go. Right. So now if we zoomed right out, and you see how you can have red and green at the same time. I just need some detailed explanation of what it's trying to show. I haven't tried to reverse engineer what it's supposed to be showing to me, and for the purposes of this webinar, we will just go back to volume pressure imbalance, because that is fairly obvious, i.e. Extremes of aggressive buy or sell delta pressure, i.e. market pressure. Okay, and the idea there is if you're looking for a long, if you've had a lot of sells at market, that could be part of a good trigger for you. For example, if you're playing back up towards this 4360 resting liquidity, and you've got that combination of the stop and this volume pressure. which obviously has some confluence and overlap with each other. Right. Any other questions? No, no other questions. So let's get on, and I'll just check that we have got some people with us. Yeah, we had quite a large audience on YouTube the other day, but not as many today, but that does not matter. Okay, right. So today we are talking about profiles, and we're going to talk about profiles both on ES and NQ. So I've dragged it into the screen sharing, my Sierra combined TPOs and VPs, and we're going to start with ES, right? I'm going to be quite detailed in as far as I can be detailed in such a short space of time. Okay, the key here, or the key to understanding the distinction between these profiles is the ones with a white background are RTH, and the ones with a slightly grey or light grey background are ETH. So it's RTH first, then ETH, RTH, then ETH, RTH, ETH, RTH, and today's ETH, right? They are not relative width to each other. I can do that just to show you what would happen if that was the case. So at this point, all the RTH ones are relative to each other. So if there's a really, really fat RTH one, for example, here, this one just here, or that one just there, that means that volume there is fatter than any other volume. In other words, there was more volume traded at that zone or price level than on the other profiles, which are narrower. But I won't do that um, for this one. We'll just go back to individual so we can actually look at the shape of the profiles, and I may have to start drawing. Right. Okay, so let's dive straight into where we are, which is today, taking out yesterday's high, yesterday's RTH high, and also taking out the high of the RTH session of not yesterday, not the day before yesterday, but 2 days before yesterday, that one there, and heading back to this volume point of control, which is also part of a 2-day value. Okay, so what I'm trying to demonstrate here, and there's one other thing which is key to understanding what I'm about to show you, which is that I can split these profiles, so by time, so these become 30-minute bars. So if I zoom out, or sorry, zoom in, each one of these vertical bars is 30 minutes. And there is a reason why I wanted to do that, which is that when we are looking at ETH, remember that RTH is well and truly shut at this time, and these stocks aren't really open, so the underlying stocks in the market aren't really open. I'm more interested in the later action in the RTH than the earlier action, especially if a new value area has, or a new value zone has been established. So if we start drawing now, I think my pen is working today, so bear with me. Okay, let's drag you over. Yep. So if I draw some value here, and I really am only looking in shapes, I don't care about specific peaks or not really, or I am looking in broad terms or broad brush approach of the general shape, and also where there's a clear delineation between one value area and another. So if I draw another one there, okay, and then I number those 1 and 2, right? The one that I'm interested in is this one. This is the afternoon values area, and this is one is the more the morning area. That's already been superseded by the afternoon one for the purposes of most of these analyses. It doesn't always apply in that way, but it does more often than not. And this is a probability game. This is definitely not a 100% game. And that's something I have to stress every single webinar. I'm not here to predict the future. I'm here to take probability-based decisions that give an overall positive expectancy on trades. Okay, so what I'm saying is that when we get to an ETH session, so if you just ignore this for the time being, just pretend it had not happened. As we get into that, and let me just collapse that back. Let's just collapse that back. We probably have to get rid of all of that. So let us just draw again. See, okay. As we came into the RTH open, this was the value area. So it's effectively this area around about here, which goes all the way across to, um, let me look at across 43455 down to about this area, right? And we also had settlement, so I'll draw that one across as well, of that. And I'm pointing out settlement because of what I've been talking about on overnight drift for the last two webinars. In other words, there's an inventory balance, and there is encouragement for that reason, if not for any other reason, for them to tag that at some stage during the ETH session. Okay, settlement is always T+1 on these profile charts. So what I'm saying is that there is a habit for them to continue to explore the latest value area or the value zone established on the RTH session throughout the ETH session until they finally break clear and start exploring and auctioning either above or below. All right. So and to illustrate this point, we're now going to go back in time. So we'll let us ditch all of that, go back to the cursor, and we start ditching that. So, for example, yeah, maybe I will just zoom down a bit so we can see roughly what I mean. I'm not going to try and break up these profiles into afternoons and mornings. I'm just going to try and illustrate this, and then we'll quickly go and do the same thing on NQ. So for today, we had that one, um, and for the previous day, we really had that value down to there. The previous day, we had that one down to about there. And this was where we had a 2 or 3 day balance, so that this one's quite interesting. So, but again, that bounce, and this is the one where you'd probably have to break it down. So even though that looks like that, it's worth at this stage exploring the bars, so breaking it down to see if there was an afternoon balance there. But you'd get the general gist. So in terms of setting a scenario or context when you first want to take a trade or to start analyzing price or auctioning in ETH, having some reference by way of the latest value established in RTH can be useful. I might just get rid of all of that again. Right. And if we get rid of the evening sessions, where you've got, yeah, I mean, you notice that I do not have a composite. It doesn't really suit what I do. It doesn't mean that I have any strong views either way as to whether they're useful or not. They just aren't useful for what I do. Okay, but when you get a multi-period bounce, and I'll split that one up as well, that went down to there, I might split that profile there and then merge that one with the next profile, and then take that block off and just establish a profile there. So that's kind of like how I look at value which overlaps considerably over a couple of days. And the other point, let me just reset the whole thing, undo all mergers. Yeah, they're all undone already. The other thing that I like to look at as well, and we can put on all the evening ones again, is where you've got a couple of highs. Where are they here? Here, let me just use my line tool and just draw that one across. Where you've got essentially a double high within a couple of days or maybe two successive days in RTH before an ETH session. That gives them even more incentive to drive it over the top of that or above that, because the likelihood or is increased for them finding stops and thereby exploring higher, i.e. the fuel to go higher, to continue to explore higher. And you can see here they are forming value there. And quickly, was it 10 minutes to go until that news? Let's have a quick look at, I've got to go back on the cursor, excuse me. Have a quick look at NQ in the same way. I'm going to have to shrink this vertically because otherwise you can't really see it. So again, if I did exactly the same thing in yesterday's, you'd have to split. I'll just do this with a mouse rather than getting my pen out. But you'd see the value there, and then you'd see this value there, and you'd see this value there, and then you relate them to what happened next, and then you've got this value here, and you relate it to what happens next. Okay, this isn't specifically a bookmap thing, but this is specifically related to ETH and the tools that you might have at your disposal to better establish a frame of reference or a zone of reference in which price may auction. So it's just showing you that both ES and NQ do auction really well, and as long as you don't get fixated on individual price levels and say, oh, this must do this to the tick, and you just look at this broad brush ranges, it might have some value to you. Okay, I'll just check to see if there's any questions or anybody wants me to go through any of that again. Yeah, it's just something that it overlaps with something I said a few weeks ago as well. I said, let me just break this one up again so I can explain. What I said, I think probably about 3 weeks ago, in terms of what one of the things that I look at in relation to RTH going into the ETH, the Asian and the European sessions, is the high and low of the afternoon session. So especially if there's been a break of value. So these numbers here, these levels here, that high and that low. So sometimes that will be the entire yesterday's high and yesterday's low. Here it wasn't because there was a complete break upwards. But I just want to put that in context with this and show you how those two pieces can go together. It's basically that high and that low is establishing, or is a very close proxy for the extreme of value in each direction before you go into this ETH session, and that is the level at which they often explore to. Who knows which direction they will go in first. You cannot predict the future. You have to accept what you see on your screens is what the market wants to do right now. But these can often be a reference, and sometimes if they don't find value up above, which they have done here, that can often be a great zone to look for a rotation back to the main part of value, like a big trade back down to about there. Okay, let us get rid of all of that. Okay. And let us have a quick look at ES. I know I've done that very quickly. I just want to make sure that we have established our context going into this major news release. So I'm just having a look, and I'm just going to zoom into both of them. And I'm noting in NQ that we do have a magnet level now. So if we zoom right back in, I'm not talking about the round number, which is a lovely large liquidity of 78, but I'm looking at the 51 liquidity at this area, the 98-ish area, the 14988 level. So yeah, that's something I would put into my notebook or whatever notes I maintain before we go into this release. Because we have established value above yesterday's high, and it looks like in a broad sense that we are continuing to auction higher, i.e. we're continuing to find value higher and potentially rotate even higher. And again, the same in ES. You've got banks of liquidity. They've put a new one in here now at 71.72, and then you have that one at 75.76, and the one up above at 80. That's 4380. Oh, it's a message from Tom. Yeah, Tom has got those issues with Discord. Tom, if you are on YouTube, you can, I'm hoping it's all working in YouTube. We've got 14 people on YouTube at the moment, so hopefully that's all working well. But yeah, all I'm trying to say is that those auctions, yesterday's afternoon activity in RTH, the fact that we've got this 8:30 major release followed by the release at 9:45 and 10, it's set them up to drive upwards and explore up into these magnetic resting liquidity above to see what will happen upon these economic releases. Okay, yeah, Tom, you're there. Good, cool. So yeah, you actually, Tom, missed my biggest or my longest session yet on profiles. So yeah, feel free to watch the recording there when I was trying to relate, how you use them as a frame of reference coming into ETH. Um, yeah, if you don't use that kind of thing, and you don't have statistics, and remember I do, and I can drag those ones across just to show people in case they've not seen it. Come on. Yeah, I do have statistics as well, especially on these ranges. And it's putting all these various bits and bobs together to form a picture of where it might go and to give you really objective bases for probabilities and trades that you might take on them. So I'm never going to say that these statistics lead to a trigger or to a setup. I'm just stating that they provide objective data which help clarify the picture of where you might be. So if we look into the data now, AS is Asia, and the second number for both of these is the average of the last 10 trading days. So in this case, if we look at the first column being ES, you can see that in ETH so far we've had 29 points. So the number here is points, not ticks on average, and we've already had 34. So we're above average for the ETH session, but that is no great surprise when you have a major economic release. The RTH numbers are yesterday's because we haven't got to RTH yet. And the sum is the sum total of everything. Okay, in other words, we've got 34 over a potential of 50, including the about to be RTH. Some of the other stuff is internals and relative volume, which I've gone through quite a few times, which changes throughout the day. And we have, for interest's sake, we have been above 100% relative volume all day in terms of the Asian and European sessions. So they have been active, and that was just one more piece of objective data, signal type information that, that trades could go somewhere today. So you might not just be scalping for a tick or two here or there. You might have decent swing ranges to trade from. Okay, I'll just get rid of that. Okay, so we've got 4 minutes. We've just come into this liquidity zone. So at the moment, everything is looking quite bullish, obviously. Just again, as I do change this up, and this is partly to get people to look at the fact that I've changed things on the screen. What I have in my book map for my own trading is very, very similar to this, but I may change or add certain things. I did have more of the stop iceberg information. I'm actually finding for this educational purpose and even for my own use, it's actually a little bit clearer if you just less is more. So the liquidity markers that I had on before, which I've had on for months and months, taking them off is not a bad thing. A color can speak just as well as a number, especially in the bookmap colors. Right. One other thing I did for this one as well was I combined the numbers instead of splitting them out for the volume profile, combine them. You can still tell when something is an unfinished auction or a rollover here. Um, if if there is no double color, so let me just zoom right in and drag it right down. So if you choose not to split these out, have buyers versus sellers, and you have them both together, um, and you go right down to here, if there is no red and green, that means there are only red, i.e. sellers at the bottom, which means that's a rollover or a small amount traded by sellers at the low and not a price at which both buyers and sellers transacted. So that is not an unfinished auction. So all I'm really trying to say there is, you don't need to have them split out. You can just do it that way. Okay, now my book map was just being a little bit slow on me there. So I'm going to try and keep that with all the order book numbers in place. The unavailable column just simply means I haven't drawn anything in Sierra, which is being pasted as a note into that column. Okay. Right, where are we? I've got to look at the exact time, 8:29. So we've got 60 seconds. So we can, I've got the coloring quite intense. In other words, I've I've used the slider to go um, to go to have the contrast on really, really high. And by having it on really high, you can see them move or dilute these major resting liquidity levels prior to the release. In fact, since the price can go anywhere very, very quickly on a major red flag release, let us zoom right out so that we've got all of, have we got them all? No, we've now got them all on the screen. So we can just watch this, and I don't actually need to talk through this. I will turn on my financial juice feed so I can hear it coming in, but we are now down to 5 seconds. And I'm not predicting anything, but we did have that resting liquidity above.
3.5%, 3.5% as expected, month over month, 0.4%, 0.4% lower.
So the numbers came out as expected. If you were on YouTube, you probably heard that. On Discord, you wouldn't have heard it. And on Discord, I think you can only hear my microphone. But if you're on YouTube, you'd have heard those numbers live. And thank you to my friends at Financial Juice for letting me do that. So yeah, interestingly, we've got a good sized iceberg there. That's the first mega or major iceberg that we've had. But they've blown straight through that. And we're going straight up to these magnetic liquidities. So it's interesting there. I mean, I like seeing a lot of this iceberg information, although I was quite happy when I took it off the other day. But yeah, do I use it as an exact tick price level as a barrier that, if they have an iceberg with 1600, we'll immediately hold that wall and then we can take a short there? No, I don't do that. I've been watching that for quite some time since it was released, and that is not an edge that I have from it. I like the information. I like the fact that however many buyers were there, 1600, or in fact 2000. We've got the actual number there, and I like the delta being dwarfing everything else there. That is the objective market generated data for me, and if I was if I was going to draw that line, but it'll move. That's the only thing, that the scales will move as price moves away. What often does happen with that is that it will often go through it and then it will come back down. It may be once or twice. So it may go straight through, then it may go up again, and then that level, that massive iceberg, may become a line in the sand a little bit later, but not quite when you think it is. You'd think, oh wow, that's 1600. That'll be a line in the sand straight away. But that's often not what happens. So I just drew that blue line there just to see whether that line is now being respected or not. It would quite surprise me if it was being respected, because you've got all this liquidity that I thought they'd actually approach first. And we did, we got close, we got to within about 3 points, but that's not as close as I expected. Let me just get rid of that and we'll go to NQ and have a look. Oh, I do not know. Oh, it must not be on my cursor because that was not working. There we go. Seems to be a slight problem in Epic Pen. Sometimes you think you're on the cursor, but you're not. Something else that I said about this resting liquidity, where it's above a round number. So in this case, it's at 15,020, above a round number of 15,000. I see that quite often. Again, nothing's 100%, but more often than not as a bullish sign that we will get through the 15,000 and get close, if not tag it. So that to me is still bullish, but anything can happen. So we're just watching, and we're looking at, let's have a look very quickly. We just zoom out in terms of, I'm just looking at the profile there. I'm also looking at the profile. I might have to just move those into another part of my screen because I can't actually, because they're tabbed into this at the moment, I can't actually see that profile develop, but I can see it in Bookmap. So we've got that line in the sand, which is now in place, and that's 4365. So yeah, depending on where you wanted to use that as supply, maybe the first time it actually did have supply, you might think about it, but I'm still wary because you've got all this liquidity. Maybe it's one of those games where they want to wait until the RTH before they go and play up there, and maybe they'll move down first and have a big dip for liquidity. But again, we cannot predict the future. What's of interest, and again, I'm focusing a lot on this live commentary for this session because it is the major part of the three-way economic releases today. It's probably the mainstay of it. A lot of what we've had in ETH. I mean, if you'd have done your homework and you developed your trading plan and you had decided on how you would use that resting liquidity and the way those values were established in RTH, yeah, there is potential that the liquidity really could have helped today. There is potential, but again, it's all about having a trading plan, accepting that your process of following your trading plan is a better trader than you are. It's quite humbling to have to admit that, but that is the case for probably everybody. Yeah, you're responsible for writing your trading plan. So, your brains went into it. Your brains went into writing the process that goes hand in hand with that trading plan, maybe set out in excruciating detail in that trading plan. Because I saw one a couple of weeks ago that was 65 pages, which is quite impressive. Covered just about every contingency that you can imagine. So, yeah, that is where your brains are best spent. Uh, in terms of detailed analysis to the second, you're not going to beat yourself. Well, a lot of this is observation. You're just observing things which have some objective nature and fact, and which you have researched and therefore developed your trading setups, your triggers, and your plans and process for those plans on the back of. But in terms of what you're actually seeing now, you're not trying to actually make money. You're trying to see whether um, you know whether it's doing what your trading plan has set you up to take as trades. And if it's not, then you're not, it's probably for the best that you don't take any trades. In other words, what I'm trying to say is your job here is not to make money. It is, it's a multiple role kind of job. One of your jobs is to strictly follow the processes set out in your trading plan. And by corollary, that will over time, if that trading plan has positive expectancy via the setups that you've got and the processes you've got, that will make the money, not you trying to make a quick dollar, for example. Now, like, if you're going to scalp up towards this resting liquidity in the 70, 71, 72 mark, um, if you were to do that, I mean, yeah, there is a way of doing it. If we zoom right in, you've got a spring, you've got this breakdown failure there. Do you have a trigger? Well, you've got to have your trading plan setting out what your trigger is. Um, you know, Maybe part of the setup at this time of the day might be resting liquidity, which has been there for a very long time. It might take into account a very bullish environment and the fact that we have been establishing value which is currently well above yesterday's high. In other words, we are exploring beyond yesterday's range. So it is a bullish picture from that perspective. On a multi-month basis, we are still in an intact uptrend. We've basically had a fake one. So yeah, maybe this is a spring. Maybe you don't need too many triggers to take it. Maybe some of what you've done is a points measurement. So if you look at the highs of this one when it broke up here, we're up at 67, 67.50, and we pulled back down to 60.50. So that was a 7-point retracement. So yeah, and if you look at that as the scene of the crime, well, we don't talk about that often because we don't get many major economic releases in this time slot. But here is the scene of the crime. You often get this lovely vertical kind of action. You've got a nice red vertical line to denote the MBO stops that were hit both up and down there. But that provides you the scene of the crime. So you can see that this pullback here, we drag a line across, maybe we'll just do a rectangle. The scene of the crime is effectively here. basically this part here, and this was a pullback to the scene of the crime. So maybe you're a pullback trader and you take it back there, and maybe this liquidity up above is helping you with your major targets. And remember that the market can always go much further than we think. Since we cannot predict what it's going to do, we do not know how far it can go. Some of our best days can be simple trails behind and just accepting that we don't know where it's going to go and that the final target is beyond our capability of recognizing where it might go. Um, let me just get rid of that. So I'm still not on the cursor. Let's set up a better shortcut so that I quickly get onto the cursor. So this is quite a thick band of liquidity. Let's go across to NQ. We've got this, don't forget I can move this to a 1 minute chart as well so we can see the candle. I should have done that before the economic release. And with some of these springs, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, I do not trade off a 3 minute chart. A lot of my best springs or what do I call them? Supply and demand categories, C's, breakout, failures, whatever, um, are on a much shorter time frame. You see that time frame on this kind of chart. Maybe in RTH, you have to zoom in even a lot more. But some of these beautiful little springs, you'd only be able to see on something like a 5 or a 10-second chart in RTH. So it's if it's one of those things where you're adamant that you only use a 15-minute chart, you might never see some of these little triggers. And what is this? This is an exploration of price back to the scene of the crime, not really finding anything. So, if we zoom in on this vertical column, they found 10 sellers at this low. That is a rollover. A single digit rollover is even better, which shows a lack of interest, but it is the kind of category C that we've defined. We have a swing low, it goes below, there is no great interest. It's either that or a great big stop. Both of those fulfill some of the things that I'm looking for, but a rollover can be very, very nice. And you have a clear liquidity target above. And one of the things I do is I trade auction theory, which is just another way of describing supply and demand. And I like liquidity because it's a clear part of that. Without liquidity, you do not get supply and demand or auction theory. So that's why these things are so inextricably linked. This is a thick band, so you'd think ordinarily, especially since they've thickened it in terms of the fact they've widened it from the top to the bottom, that it would be hard for them to go through on one bash. But this is ETH still, and they can crunch through things faster than I can imagine. So let's just have a quick look at NQ. So you've still got that 20 level there, which is the one that really, really interests me. Never ever expect price to go in a straight line up there. So it's what we've also said, that you're looking for this kind of area, these big fat red areas to provide fuel. Your price goes down to go up. So and I zoom in and out a lot because I'm looking for the fuel, especially in NQ because it's so thin. I need the fuel. I need in the structural formations that I'm looking for to get me towards the targets, which can include liquidity targets. And here it's above until things change. And remember, things can change. All of a sudden, somebody else can come along and price can change from an auctioning up to an auctioning down. And we have to accept that. Just because it looks lovely and bullish at this second does not mean that that is going to continue. Right, I have been talking non-stop for about 20 minutes on that one, so let me just double check there are no questions in the channel or up above. I'm also just checking that the YouTube stream is working okay. It does look like it's working okay. Okay, what have we said about some of these big bands before in these webinars? We said that the first touch is often not the one that gets through. So it'll often be a couple of touches, sometimes 2 or 3 or even 4 touches before it starts to eat through the liquidity. So do not be surprised if there is a turnaround just beforehand. So here it turned around 2 ticks before the real liquidity above. And again, by real liquidity, I've got to have some objective numbers. So it can be yellow and orange, but if that is not backed up by really large numbers, which are relative to really small numbers in that order book, then it is not real resting liquidity in my eyes, in the sense that it is not MGI type resting liquidity, market generated information, which is objective in its nature. So we've had the first touch, the second touch, and the third touch. We're finally going to start eating into it. And if we just for a second zoom right out on this one, so we're just zooming right out just to see what is above. So let me just get rid of the evening sessions for a second, apart from today's, and just see. So we've got this area here which was heavily traded. Yeah, and so the next time I can see anything really, when we get to about 76, 77, yeah, then we are looking at yet another value area that it could get into. With one of Tom's composites, it would probably be clearer to him. But I just like having the order book, which is what these horizontal bars are. So the order book to me, it shows how wide or how heavy the liquidity is at each of these really wide bars. So you can see from a very large perspective all the way down to 4284 up to 4420. That's almost 150 points, but not quite. Where the major liquidity is. And price is attracted by liquidity, and that applies especially or even more so in ETH than RTH. RTH, the games are a little bit more complex, a little bit nastier. So if I'm talking about concepts like resting liquidity, it's always or nearly always going to, because nothing is always, it's going to be a little bit clearer or cleaner depending on which language you prefer in the ETH session. Yeah, it's interesting looking at this volume pressure imbalance, and I'll just double check that's what we're showing on the market pulse on NQ. Yeah, it's the volume pressure imbalance. It's a completely different beast to the price change algo that was written. So, so when you get these green peaks, they're just thrusts of buying pressure. Yeah, whereas the ones in the price change algo are really RSI kind of relative extremes of price. So in other words, you might get these at the end of a move, but quite often you'll get them during a move. So in other words, you might not want to fade them. So let's zoom right into here. So you've got this little wedge here of sellers that are acting as a little bit of fuel at the moment, but price does not seem to have ignition to want to go up and explore. And they're also trying to hold price in NQ with this liquidity here of 110. So it's a holding pattern. They want to keep it down here. Why might they want to keep it down here? They might want to keep it down here so they trap some more sellers. You can see this growing here, this sell profile. It's quite a nice distribution, and maybe they're going to take us all the way back down there. Quite often, back when we had month upon month upon month of really high gains in NQ every single day. Sometimes because price action was so bullish, they had to have really, really big liquidity breaks, which is one way of describing this. It's a big dip down to get some people trapped, i.e. sellers trapped into believing it's going to go down further, because those sellers are the fuel to take it back up and continue going upwards. So what are we looking at in NQ? We're looking at this in NQ because it's often easier to see. So because it's a thin market, I really can't encapsulate it in words probably as simple as I'd like to. Some of these swing points in terms of sells and buy delta are cleaner and clearer in NQ swing points than they would be in ES. And remember that these markets do not operate on their own. So there may be people that that want NQ to go up, or they're interested in their bullish NQ. They don't necessarily buy NQ. There are a lot of little growth ETFs that have similar stocks. There's lots of options players around. There's lots of individual stocks. as well as those ETFs. So there's lots of different ways for them to play it. ES being a more hedged instrument or thicker instrument, that's one of the reasons why those delta swing points are not as clean. So what I'm just saying is that some of these um, clear red tails on the reversals before they go back up again are a lot cleaner and clearer to see in NQ than they might be in ES, and that's one of the reasons why, apart from the fact that you can get good reward or multiple R type reward on NQ, that's one of the reasons why you might be interested in trading in ETH, but you have to accept your stops. If you don't accept your stops and you're trading in NQ, you can get yourself into an awful lot of trouble, because it's a far, far better thing to be wrong early than to be wrong too late when your broker's terminated your account. Okay, where are we? 2049, 11 minutes to go. So we're back on this barrier that NQ has. It'll be interesting to see when they finally release that barrier, or whether they actually interact with that barrier. That's my shortcut working on. You can see how slow the action is in ES compared to NQ. And you can see as well that it looks like a very, very gentle pullback there. And if we zoom out, there is a thinner band of liquidity here down to 4360, but there's nothing yet. And again, the word that is very, very important is yet. There's nothing in comparison to the resting liquidity above. So in other words, it's a little bit more vicious in terms of the types of dips that we've been seeing so far in NQ. And what would not surprise me is if that the final dip, before they do start tackling this liquidity above, if they do that, if the final dip was quite vicious, suddenly it really looked like it was going to keep going down, because that is the best trick that they can play. If you were in their shoes and you were trying to fool a bunch of people into selling or shorting this market, you'd do your darndest, your absolute best to make them think it was going to go down. And that's what they do, and that's what they're very, very, very good at. Yeah, so the fact that this liquidity came in here is not resting liquidity in my eyes. So um, it's hard to define exactly when liquidity becomes, you can sort of deem it resting. It may well get interacted with. It may just be this artificial fake barrier that they have no intention of trading at. Um, but yeah, when I'm talking about resting liquidity, I'm normally talking about things that have been there for a few hours, 3, 4, preferably 8 or 9 or 10 hours. And I'm also talking about in the context that they can suddenly remove it. Just in an absolute flash, it can go completely. Why might it go? Well, it may have been a fake game, or secondly, they may have got their fills. If this liquidity suddenly disappeared here, and we can zoom back out and just watch what's down the bottom here, they may have had enough sell fuel in this little patch here. It doesn't look like they have just yet, um, for this to no longer be part of their game. That's one of the things that I'm half expecting, that this has a nice push down and then this disappears. And they've advertised, roughly around the same time, maybe a little bit before. I wouldn't be surprised if it wasn't the same algo or large institution that was at all three of these levels. That's the 980 level, this level, and this level. They're effectively playing two levels at the moment. And it does look like they're trying to push back down to that level before we have any further move up. And they're doing quite a good job in ES as well. We're still well above yesterday's high, so there's nothing major in terms of this pullback. It's still a pullback. We haven't gone anywhere near yesterday's high. We're still out of range. One of those other facts that I occasionally bring up about major economic releases in this 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. slot is that an extreme of the day, whether it's the high or low of the day, is often made within 15 minutes of the release of that information. So in other words, what's within 15 minutes? You've got a low here. You've got a low here in ES. I'm not sure if price traded quite down to there. I think it must have done, or I wouldn't have a grey line, of 4360.50, 4,360.5, right? There have been many occasions where that, if it turned out to be a trend up day, was the low for the entire rest of the sessions, including the RTH session. That's just something you have to be aware of. If there are good probabilities for this being a trend up day, and you're not going to know that it's a true trend day until the end of the RTH session. So nobody knows. I don't know. We're just talking about the future and we're not predicting it, but we're just saying there is a statistic that quite often the extreme is made within 15 minutes of the scene of or the time of the crime, which at the time of the crime was 8:30. You have a low there which was made 7 minutes. No, about 6 minutes after the release. That low there, if we drew a line, you know, is that low going to remain intact to give us grounds for saying that it has the potential for an uptrend day? We know we've got some resting liquidity above. We know that they want to, there is an attraction up there. It's just a question of when will they get the fuel? And you've also got this lovely iceberg here, and you can see this so clearly in the delta column, the width there that we marked earlier at the 4365. That's also acting as the initial basis of support. So you could have said that you had real demand there on breaking that through that iceberg, and maybe you could have taken that scalp and got a couple of points on along from the retest of that. So if we'd drawn that line across, let's just draw it from here. So if we drew that one across from there, that that you could say that was a pullback. You could say that was a breakdown there. It doesn't look like they finished though, does it? And the fact that this has been they've gone through it up and down several times means it's not an immutable wall. Let me just go back to NQ because I'm curious about the liquidity below in NQ. And once again, I haven't got my cursor. No, we're not. Yeah, no, the ES is actually leading the way down at the moment. So yeah, we're watching the liquidity here, and the other thing we're watching is this delta column going down to that liquidity. We're looking to see if there is enough fuel to drag us back up to there, 15020. And that is my main purpose of that delta column. In terms of seeing buyers at the start of a move or sellers at the start of the move, I don't tend to look at that too much because I can see it in the dots. We've kept, we did have an interaction there. That's interesting. Let me get back on the cursor. Did we interact? Let's have a look. I had 128 there. Yeah, it does look like they interacted there. So they did trade there. It will be interesting to see if we can get back down there, spring that, and then go higher. Or whether this on its own is enough fuel to take us up to there. Yeah, so far it's quite a shallow pullback, so if that is enough fuel, they did not seem to need much fuel. You can see it's still quite a nice red tail apart from a little green bit in the middle. That is interesting. Let me just get rid of that. Make sure I'm on the cursor so we can get back to ES. And what are we doing this time? We are zooming out, looking at that liquidity. Again, I'm saying that with my categories, maybe we can simplify categories A and B being that test of the supply-demand zone. So you just really have an A/B, kind of a combo, whether it's a deep test right back to a double bottom, double top, or or before, and one, and the category C, which is slightly different, which is the breakout failure, where they're often targeting the stops of fuel. So it's interesting that iceberg really is acting as that line in the sand to get us back up to this liquidity. So this is the latest attempt at getting through it. Yeah, so if you'd taken the spring there, right at that line in the sand, and you'd got in at 65, and it was possible, maybe 65.25. Yeah, that's 4 points, virtually straight up without any retracement. And we all have to be very, very humble. When you get that, when it basically goes 4 points up in a straight line, and you're long, you have to be very grateful in my eyes. Because we cannot predict what the market is going to do. We cannot force them to go up. We can talk about all the factors suggesting that they may come back up and retag this liquidity, but that does not mean they will do it. I think we're into the last 30 seconds. So establishing another iceberg here. This iceberg does interest me because if we have a large green zone, i.e. lots and lots and lots of buyers taken up or absorbed through this liquidity, that could be the basis for some fuel to go back down. So far we've only had 10. I like the confluence, and I said this the other day, I like the confluence of these resting sell icebergs above price with resting liquidity above as well. So for me, provided you then get into a structure which aligns with your trade setups, these are an initial target, the level at which the sell iceberg is at, or at least within one tick of it. Um, but it's not something you don't, as soon as you see that, you don't let it just go down 2 ticks and jump straight on. You're still waiting for the trade plans that you've designed, the trade setups that you've designed in your trading plan. You're not chasing money. And with that, I think I've just about run out of time. Yeah, I'm hoping some of that profile stuff was useful to people. And thank you very much for watching. I shall end the stream and let my heavy cold voice have a rest. Thank you all for coming.